What is War of Immortals? What's it all about? And is this war a bore? Yeah, no, it's definitely not. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder Second Edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to be going over 5 things that I love and 3 that I loathe about the recently released new rulebook, War of Immortals by Paizo for PF2E. There is a lot to love in this book, so I'm only going over the top 5 things for me personally. I'll also give you a very brief explanation as to what the book is all about. So let's get stuck in. Music time. First up, let's start with a brief summary of the book itself. War of Immortals is all about deific powers called mythic in the Pathfinder systems, and the book offers ways to make your player characters mythic themselves, as well as introducing 2 new classes, the Animist and Exemplar, and a few new class archetypes, dedications, items, plus a few mythic spells and monsters. I'm generally quite happy with the book, and for those that are thinking of introducing godlike powers into their campaign, I highly recommend it. For those who don't care for that, or who aren't interested in the new classes, etc., or will be accessing them for free online, I guess it's not all that good for you. The mythic system doesn't really work in most campaigns in my opinion, and has to be really considered before using it. Regardless, I think it's a great book and I heartily recommend it. And now I'm going to jump into my list, starting with my 5 favourite things about the book. And if you think this video was helpful or informative, as ever, please give it a like and or comment and consider subscribing. As we were, number 1, the Animist Class. Probably a no-brainer, but the Animist is really cool. It's basically a wisdom-based divine caster with proficiency in medium armor, 8 HP per level, that gets both prepared and spontaneous spellcasting. Yes, that sounds kind of weird, and that's because being weird is the Animist's MO. So in simple terms, the spellcasting works like this. The Animist gets 2 prepared spells per rank per day from the Divine Tradition spell list, similar to the Cleric, but they get to attune to 2 different apparitions at level 1, then 3 at level 7, and finally 4 at 15th level, and they get to set one of them as the main apparition for the time being. Each of these apparitions, which are kind of like spirits that the Animist communes with, comes with 1 spontaneous spell per rank and 2 castings of these specific spells. They also come with a unique focus spell each, and when the Animist refocuses, they can swap apparition. This means that you could potentially have crap loads of different spells available. So for example, you could prepare 2 heal spells, then grab the apparition that comes with the Protector Tree spell, which is the custodian of groves and gardens, becoming the ultimate support caster, and then the next time you refocus, you could swap out the custodian for the witness to ancient battles and pretty much become a martial class with sure strike and a focus spell that almost makes you as good as a martial class. To top that off, all of your apparition spells are signature spells, meaning that they can all be freely heightened, and if you grab the Circle of Spirits feat at level 1, you can swap out an apparition for 1 action and do all of this mid-combat. And that's just a taste of some of the amazing stuff you can do with the Animist. Obviously, there's a lot more to say on the class, and I haven't even mentioned the 4 subclasses that give you feats and other passives as you level, but suffice to say, it really is an amazing divine caster and is up there with Cleric in my opinion. And while it doesn't really share the same sort of playstyle, I honestly think it's kind of a much better version of the Oracle. Anyway, on to number 2. The Exemplar Class. Yeah, who could have seen this coming? Honestly, when I first saw the playtest for the Exemplar, I wasn't exactly blown away, but maybe that's just because I wasn't looking into it too deeply enough because it's just a playtest. But after seeing the full extent of what the Exemplar Class is capable of in this book, honestly, it's absolutely fantastic, and the character build options here are supreme. So the Exemplar is a 10 HP medium armor wearing strength or dexterity based class, but it's a rare class, the first one in PF2E, and that's because it has a divine spark within it. That literally means that it has some sort of godly abilities inside the class, so of course you'd have to discuss it with your GM whether or not they want it in their campaign. If they do allow it in the campaign, you are in for a treat. The Exemplar gets to choose 3 icons at level 1, which can be anything from weapons to worn equipment or even imbued into their body. When a fight begins, some of the divine spark goes into one of these icons via the Shift Imminence ability, which basically powers an icon up and gives it a permanent passive. These passives can range from straight up extra spirit damage to an emanation that gives allies a +1 status bonus to AC. The Exemplar can, for up to 3 actions depending on the icon, spark Transcendence, which allows allows the currently powered up icon to do a really cool thing, like allow you to do a strike and then heal for some of the damage, or get a 1d6 worth of precision damage on your next attack. Once that's done, the Divine Spark moves from the current icon to another one of your choice, and the cycle repeats. This means that you'll be cycling between 2 or 3 different icons during battles, activating different abilities and effects when you deem it necessary. Now, there's currently 21 icons of all types, which means that's already a lot of build choices for players, but the Exemplar's epithets take it one step further. At level 3, you pick your root epithet, which kicks in when you spark Transcendence. It's kind of like a subclass option, except it's at level 3, and then you get to pick another one at level 7 and another at level 15. And some of the options here are kind of crazy good when you consider that you have 3 icons to choose also. For example, your first epithet could be the Radiant, which lets you heal an ally for 2 plus double your level once every 10 minutes, so long as they're within 30 feet of you when you spark Transcendence. Or once you hit level 7, you could pick the Of Verse Unbroken epithet, which gives one of your allies within 30 feet of you when you spark Transcendence a free sustain action. And these epithets come with some other benefits too, like giving you training in a particular skill or making enemies stupefied when you crit against them. By now, you should be able to see the ludicrous amount of build choices you could have when picking this class, and the sheer variety of things you could do in any one fight. This class went from one I was kinda about to being one that I cannot wait to play as. War of Immortals alone is worth the asking price just for these 2 classes, and I honestly could not be happier with them. I feel like as time has gone on, Paizo have just become better and better at making classes for PF2E, and this book is no exception. Okay, let's move on to my next favourite thing about the book. Number 3. The Bloodrager. So the Bloodrager for PF2E is quite a bit different from Pathfinder First Edition's version of it. How it worked in First Edition was it was basically a barbarian that could cast spells similar to a sorcerer, and in some ways it's kind of similar here, except there's a bit more emphasis on the blood part of Bloodrager. How it works is that this is a class archetype for the barbarian, so you pick it at level 1 instead of picking barbarian. It basically makes your rage damage deal bleed damage over time rather than instant damage. And this is both an advantage and disadvantage, as bleed damage in itself is generally pretty fantastic, because if they keep failing that flat check to recover from it, they're just going to keep taking that damage, which could potentially be more than what you would deal if you kept missing your attacks. But if you didn't keep missing your attacks, then yeah, you'd be better off being a normal barbarian if you're just looking for straight up damage. But if you're looking for something more interesting, Bloodrager's got you covered, because they get to cast spells, which can be either arcane or weirdly divine. Initially, you're not actually going to get access to any spells, as this is similar to picking a spellcaster dedication in that you get to level 2 and you get cantrips, and you need to level up more for ranked spells. So you're going to have to wait until level 4 before you can actually access these spells. And on top of that, whenever you do cast a spell while you're in a rage, you become drained 1, and the value increases as you cast more and more spells. However, you do get the Harvest Blood action, which allows you to consume the blood upon your weapon, which reduces your drain condition by 1 and gives you temporary hit points, which is kind of creepy and awesome. And later on at level 6, when you get the Siphon Magic Feat, you can regain a spell slot so long as the person's blood you drank was a spellcaster. Yummy magic blood. There's also another feat that allows you to add specific temporary spells to your spell repertoire, which is again pretty cool. Thus, the actual spellcasting capabilities of this class are going to be somewhat limited, as it's not going to get all that many spell slots, and you become drained each time you cast a spell, and you'd have to do things to mitigate that condition. But the plus side is that you get to be a barbarian that casts spells, because any spells you cast as a Bloodrager that come from your repertoire gain the rage trait, meaning that you can actually cast them while raging. And this means for people who find the barbarian a little bit too simplistic, as it's basically one of those classes that goes in and hits stuff for big damage, you have an alternative version of the class now, one with a bit more complexity and one that can cast spells and even regain spell slots by being super dark and disgusting. I'm just generally quite happy with how this class archetype works. I know it's not going to be perfect for some people who are expecting it to be exactly the same as a Pathfinder First Edition version, and I guess that in a white room its actual damage per round won't be as much as the giant subclass for Barbarian or whatever, but I actually genuinely think that it works rather well, and it's a very interesting take on an old idea. Okay, next up on my list, something I really couldn't ignore going into this video chapter, number 4. Mythic Stuff. This was the part of the book that I was honestly looking forward to the most. I've been waiting for a Mythic system for Pathfinder Second Edition since I heard of it in the first edition, in the Wrath of the Righteous adventure path, which ultimately became a video game, which I imagine some of you have played. To summarize this as briefly as possible, the Mythic system is basically your character slowly becoming a demigod and maybe eventually a god. So they are given abilities and powers that are, quite frankly, very powerful. So this is the sort of thing that you'd have to agree with your GM is going to happen in your campaign kind of prior to it actually happening. It isn't really something you can just bolt onto any campaign. Realistically, this pretty much has to be relevant to the campaign itself, or at least that's how I see the system working. So you basically transition from standard characters to mythic characters when a certain mythic event happens. Obviously, this is all up to your GM, though I imagine there would be some session 0 discussion with them about how, when, and why this would happen. After the event has happened, you get given your mythic calling, which is kind of like an archetype, and you also get given the Rewrite Fate action. Rewrite Fate is a free action that allows you to use your mythic proficiency plus a mythic point to reroll a skill check. Mythic proficiency levels are the one after legendary, meaning that they are plus 10. This means that for just one mythic point, you can reroll a skill check with a plus 10 on it, which is mental. I'll get into mythic points in a second. As for the callings, there are 11 of them. Acrobat, Artisan, Bookkeeper, Caretaker, Demagogue, Guardian, Handler, Hunter, Sage, Thespian, and Thief. These each come with their own edicts and anathema, and on top of this, as you level, you get to pick mythic feats, which each cost a mythic point to use. But what is a mythic point? Basically, hero points are replaced with mythic points, and you start a session with 3 of them rather than 1, and there's multiple ways to regain them during a session, such as slaying a mythic creature, which gives you 1 point, or completing a mythic deed, which are meant to be moderate challenges for the party and restore all 3 of them. A mythic creature, by the way, is a bunch of rather detailed templates you can add to creatures and give them mythic points of their own and makes them much stronger, among other things. As for the mythic feats, some of them are specific to certain callings, though generally most of the feats can be used with any of them. A few examples of these mythic feats: Godspeed, which you can get at level 4, that for 1 action gives you a plus 10 foot status bonus to all your speeds and you are quickened for an entire minute. Once you reach level 6, you can take the Correct the Story reaction, which kicks in when an enemy critically succeeds at an attack roll or saving throw, and you basically make them re-roll it and take the second result. At level 8, you could use the Mythic Refocus single action to spend a mythic point and restore all of your focus points. There's even the Summon Mythic Power ability that you can use once per day, which just simply gives you back a mythic point for 1 action. These feats go all the way up to level 10 and are basically as overpowered as they sound, which is honestly kind of fair. Realistically, how could you make a system that gives characters godlike abilities in a TTRPG and not have those abilities somewhat overpowered? I think that while there are some slight criticisms you could direct towards the Mythic system, I generally think they did a great job, and I think it's very interesting and pretty cool. If you want a campaign where your characters slowly become gods, this is a great way to do it. And while I'm not going to be going properly into it, along with mythic feats and whatnot are mythic destinies available to level 12 mythic characters, which are basically superpowered archetypes that also use mythic points. There's the Apocalypse Rider, Archfiend, Ascended Celestial, Beast Lord, Broken Chain, Eternal Legend, Godling, Prophesied Monarch, and Wild Spell, and only one of them sounds like a piece of broken equipment. And if you're looking for rules on how someone actually turns into a god, the Godling mythic destiny is literally that and comes with all the systems and explanations on how that would work. Alright, on to my last favourite thing about this book: the new Nephilim types. War of Immortals added 4 new lineage types for the Nephilim. Realistically, this is not a big deal, but one of them in particular I just think sounds absolutely amazing: the Battleblooded. This is basically a Nephilim that descends from legendary Einherjar. These are basically the old Norse warriors that have been slain in battle, meaning that your soul comes from one of them, or you could even be a descendant of a freaking Valkyrie. I just think that being able to be a Nephilim that's sort of born from an old Norse warrior's soul that's died in battle is just absolutely awesome for roleplay, and really makes the Nephilim heritage all that more interesting. The book also comes with a few more ancestry feats for these specific lineages, such as the Call to Battle feat, which allows you to use your reaction to stand after losing the unconscious condition, and there's the Glory and Valor feat that is a single action that you can use once per day that heals you when you strike an enemy for HP equal to half your level, and it lasts a whole minute, which is just really cool. And yes, I've kind of honed in on this one very specific Nephilim lineage rather than the other 3, but that's because I absolutely love it and it's a kick-ass addition to this book. Okay, we're done with my 5 favourite things, and now we're going to have to move on to the more negative side of this video chapter. I say these things only only because I love PF2E and because I want Paizo to try to take on some of these criticisms and maybe learn from them. I know it's a bit rich me saying that, but this next bit is definitely going to be a lot more negative than I've possibly ever been. And that's not because I don't like the book, it's because I do like the book. I would like future Paizo products to be even better. And do note that my criticisms are, of course, my opinion. Okay, so the first thing I don't like so much in War of Immortals, the Exemplar dedication. I should initially mention that Paizo have already errated this dedication and made it rare as opposed to common like it is in the book. So take this next bit of criticism with a little pinch of salt, because ultimately the dedication being rare means that the GM can basically say, no, you can't be it. Still, it's just a little bit too powerful. The only requirements is that you have either strength or dexterity and +2, unlike the fighter that needs you to have both of them. And you also become trained in all martial weapons and immediately gain 1 icon and the ability to use the icon's imminence and transcendence actions. You do have to spend an extra action to shift imminence to repower your icon rather than it just going to another one, which obviously doesn't work because you only get 1. But the problem is that you can just immediately pick some of the icons that give you a really good passive bonus, like the one that gives you +2 damage, and realistically, considering this is only dedication, getting a +2 to every single attack with a single feat and getting martial weapon proficiency is probably considered a bit overpowered. Even scarier is if you take the Victor's Wreath icon, which gives you and all your allies a +1 status bonus to attack rolls. So if you're a fighter and you pick this, you are effectively getting a permanent +1 to all of your attack rolls, which is honestly a little bit crazy to me. It's not the worst thing ever, and I'm really glad that they've errated it to make it rare, but I honestly am not sure what Paizo could do otherwise to fix this dedication, except maybe making icons become available a little bit later on, or maybe making it so that shifting imminence costs a couple of actions or something. I'm honestly not sure, but as it is right now, it's probably a little bit too overpowered for my taste. Okay, another part of the book that I'm not a big fan of are 2 of the other class archetypes, Vindicator for Ranger and Warrior of Legend for Fighter. The Vindicator is meant to be a sort of replacement for the Inquisitor. For those who aren't aware, the Inquisitor was a Pathfinder First Edition class that was relatively well loved. Paizo said that the term Vindicator is the more good version of an Inquisitor and the evil version is the Inquisitor. Still, none of that changes the fact that this class archetype just feels a bit lacking. So all of your Warden spells become Divine spells, and your Hunter's Edge gives you a +1 status bonus to spell attack rolls against your hunted prey, and they take a -1 to saving throws against your Divine spells. They also get given a focus spell that's 2 actions, has 60-foot range, and does 2d4 spirit damage to an enemy, and it has to be done against your hunted prey. If it hits, they take an extra 2 damage from all of your attacks. You see, the problem with this is that if you're a precision ranger, you just have to spend 1 action to hunt prey, and then you're getting a free 1d8 against your first attack every round against that enemy. Having to use your Hunter's Mark and then use a 2-action focus spell, which initially you're only going to be able to use once per fight, just to do 2d4 spirit damage and give them +2 damage from all of your weapon attacks, is honestly just a bit pants. At rank 5, you finally get a Judgment spell, which gives them weakness 5 to your next strike or your next damaging Divine spell, and it's finally good to actually have a Judgment spell. It's just one of those class archetypes that's just not particularly good until you get it pretty high level, and then up until that point it just kind of makes you a bad version of the base class. Speaking of, Warrior of Legend. The idea for this fighter archetype was that it effectively gets some weakness in exchange for some strengths. It's just that the things you're sacrificing are probably a bit too much. So you're no longer trained in heavy armor and you don't gain shield block either, and then you have to pick a weakness, bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, and you do gain Die Hard, which is nice, but whenever you take damage from your weakness, you become doomed to, and you're forced to use spears and polearms in that it's the only way to get your +2 to those attacks, beyond your initial expert proficiency. Again, as you level up, it does come with some relatively decent abilities. It's just that up until those higher levels, you're just going to be a rubbish fighter. I just don't understand why you'd want to pick this class archetype. Look, I'm not trying to say that every single archetype and every single dedication, etc. should be just as powerful as the base class, but I think in the case of the Bloodrager, you did get some pretty significant advantages to picking it along with some disadvantages. Like being able to cast spells as a barbarian is a pretty huge advantage. disadvantage. It comes at the cost of some damage, but it has some cool stuff along with it. Whereas these other two class archetypes I've mentioned, they just aren't all that interesting to me, and I can never imagine ever wanting to choose them. Not just because they have lower damage per round or whatever, but because the disadvantages are just a little bit too high versus the advantages. I would imagine that a lot of people have been waiting for PF2E's version of the Inquisitor are going to be kind of let down with this version, because I mean they only really get one judgment, and that comes at a relatively high level. And while I don't actually know anyone who's like massively looking forward to the Warrior of Legend, it's still kind of a bit rubbish, and I don't really know why anyone would want to choose that over the fighter. And if you're with me and you're not a big fan of the new Inquisitor, there is a third-party book called Soldiers of the Immortal War that I mentioned in one of my previous videos, and it's pay what you want. And it has its own version of the Inquisitor along with judgments and everything, plus lots of other stuff. This isn't an ad, by the way, I just really like the book. And it even comes with Path Builder and Foundry integration. Links in the description as always. Anyway, the final criticism is no divine spells. In Secrets of Magic, the Dark Archive, and Rage of Elements, we got arcane, occult, and primal spells respectively, and in the book all about gods, the War of Immortals, we get no divine spells. There are some mythic spells, but they require the mythic system, including mythic points, to use. Mythic. Sorry, I just wanted to say mythic again. Considering the divine spell list in PF2E is known to be the weakest of all the traditions, it's extremely perplexing as to why we haven't been given any more divine spells in a book specifically about divine gods and magic. I was really looking forward to some new divine spells. I honestly thought it was a no-brainer to include some more in this book. Very strange, and I don't really understand why we don't have any more, and if the answer is because there's not enough page space, well, I just hate that answer, quite frankly. So, while that is actually the end of my criticisms, there's kind of an extra sort of note of criticism I want to add. Paizo, can you please do a better job of proofreading your books? I've already come across a few issues with the Kineticist and Barbarian with regards to the Mythic Destinies part of the book, because some of the abilities require concentration, which means the Barbarian simply cannot use those dedications, and because the Kineticist is kind of not a martial and kind of not a spellcaster, some of the reroll things just don't work with them. On top of that, I saw that in the Animist dedication for the level 4 spellcasting feat, it says that it requires the Cleric dedication. Whoopsie. Come on, Paizo, if I saw that, almost immediately on my first look through the book, I'm sure you could have seen it too, with multiple eyes on this book on multiple occasions. Apparently, it's kind of common for Paizo to have to do lots of erratas for these books for silly mistakes like these, but I honestly just don't really think that it's okay to accept it. People are paying money for these products, and while mistakes do happen, they happen a little bit too often for my liking in these books. Don't get me wrong, it could be a hell of a lot worse, but it's just something that slightly irks me. Plus, if you get the physical books, then you're going to have these errors and misprints until the end of time, which kinda sucks. Anyway, despite my criticisms, I do actually think the book is rather good and has pretty much lived up to my expectations. The two new classes in particular are absolutely phenomenal. I really like what Paizo have done with them, and it really makes me excited for the two new upcoming classes that are coming hopefully next year. And for those who do not have the book yet, do you have any questions that I can answer for you about it? Feel free to pop some questions in the comments and I will do my best to answer you. And as ever, if you found the video informative or helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing. Seriously, I really appreciate the kind comments, they make my day. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominomicon wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.